Parker, Communications Director at the Fish and Boat Commission. And if you're tuned into Facebook Live, you'll be seeing our wrap-up session as part of our 2021 Virtual Outdoor Expo, and we'll begin our conversation in about 30 seconds. All right, well, hello everyone, and thanks again for joining us for this, what is now the final session of our 2021 Virtual Outdoor Expo, hosted this week by the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. My name is Mike Parker, Communications Director, and this is our wrap-up show for this week-long event, which means we don't really have a formal agenda for this session, but what we wanted to provide was a final chance for anyone who's tuned in this week to ask any questions that you might have about the other topics that we presented. It's also your chance, our chance to tell you about some of the upcoming events with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And to do that, we brought in a guy who's sort of a jack of all trades for the agency. One of our top fellas. This is Andy Shields, and he has the title of Deputy Executive Director for Field Operations. So, Andy, that's a title, but what's more important is your experience. So let's start things off and let people know exactly what that means and what you do for the Fish and Boat Commission.
Sure, Mike. Well, I was fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to be born into a fishing family. And so fishing was the #1 family activity in my household, including fishing in saltwater during the summer, freshwater during the spring, ice fishing in the winter. And I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to Penn State, and through Penn State, I ended up with an internship and ended up at the Fish and Boat Commission in 1985 as a student intern, unpaid. So I paid for the opportunity to work here. And almost 36 years later, I'm still here, and I'm the Deputy Director for Field Operations, as you mentioned. And Field Operations at Fish and Boat Commission consists of 4 bureaus: the Bureau of Fisheries, the Bureau of Hatcheries, Engineering, and the new Bureau of Boating. And combined, those 4 bureaus represent more than half of the employees in the agency. And basically, it is what it sounds like. It's the folks that are separate from law enforcement that are out in the field, basically on a day-to-day basis, doing the things that you're used to seeing: raising fish, stocking fish, sampling fish, doing things for safe boating, fixing accesses, repairing lakes, things of that nature.
Which is a great reason to have you on, because some of the follow-up questions that we received this week that we didn't get a chance to talk about definitely were questions that were aimed at our fisheries management staff. So Andy, with your background, you'll be the perfect person to answer that once we get to that portion of this session. I want to remind anyone who's watching us right now as we stream on Facebook that your questions and comments throughout this session, which we expect to be 30-40 minutes, we'll definitely wrap it up before 2 o'clock. But this is the chance to provide those answers. So ask away. We'll do our best to tie up any loose ends for the week. And also remember that if you have any of the frequently asked basic questions about fishing and boating, your best chance to have those answered at any time outside of this session is simply by going to our website, fishandboat.com. All right, so Andy, we got to know you a little bit. Let's go and just sort of run down some of the big topics that we talked about this week. And a lot of the questions that we got were related to, no surprise, some of the changes that are coming up to the 2021 trout season. So I want to take the opportunity to right now, just here off the top, to go over those changes again, if you would. Lay out the dates, how we're dealing with stocking, volunteers, and some other things that are occurring because of those changes.
Sure. Well, because of COVID and adjustments we've needed to make due to the pandemic and interactions with the public and our staff, we made some changes for 2021. We'll start in the order of the things that you're likely to see happen first. And that is on February 15th, trout season, harvest season, and being able to fish for trout in our streams will close. Normally it closes on the last day of February. This year it'll close on February 15th. And that provides an opportunity for the Fish and Boat Commission hatchery staff to start stocking the trout 2 weeks early. And we want to stock the trout 2 weeks early so we can get a jump on the season so that our opening day statewide, which is going to occur on April 3rd, will be 2 weeks earlier than the normal statewide opening. So in the past, we've had a split opener. The southeastern part of the state opens first, and then the statewide opener, the other 2/3 of the state, happens 2 weeks later, usually in mid-April. This year, we're going to have a single statewide opener on April 3rd. And as most people know, if they've participated in the Mentored Youth program, the Mentored Youth fishing is always the Saturday before your respective state or local opener. And so this year, that statewide single Mentored Youth Day will be on March 27th. So the dates of importance are after next Monday, you won't be able to fish in any of the streams, or actually on Monday on the 15th. And the lakes, though, will stay open. You won't be able to harvest, but you'll be able to fish, even though there'll be some trout being stocked for the springtime opener. And that was because we know that a lot of lakes that we stock trout in are very important to people in the ice fishing season. And unlike the last couple of years, we've got a solid ice fishing year going here. We didn't want to take 2 weeks away from people who like to ice fish for the first time maybe in a couple of years here in Pennsylvania. And so there'll be some changes. The idea is that we spread the folks out with a single opening day. It starts 2 weeks earlier, giving people who are, I think, still starving for opportunities to do things, because so many things are still closed for indoor events, that they'll have an opportunity to get out if the weather's nice and they're available to do some early trout fishing and extend their trout fishing season for 2021.
And as far as how we're handling the volunteers, walk-ups, as compared to who were, just tell people how that's working.
Yeah, so we've had to make some hard decisions in the last year, and the one we made last year was that we couldn't find a way to have the volunteers help us and maintain the social distancing and the safe practices. A year's gone by. I think people understand social distancing, PPE, and what the right behavior is when they're around other people. So it was decided this year that the volunteers are very important for helping to get the fish in the water, get them spread out. It was decided this year to have a little bit of a hybrid where our conservation officers traditionally work with certain clubs, certain individuals, and certain groups that are traditional helpers for them, and they know who those folks are. And so what we're planning to do is invite those people that we know, that we've worked with. We'll maintain a roster so that if somebody does become in contact or infected with COVID, there'd be a way to follow that up and do the contact tracing. For that primary reason, we're concerned about allowing just anybody who walks up to a stocking to jump in, grab a bucket, and participate. So we think we're getting closer back to normal. We're not quite back to normal, but this will allow the folks that we're used to working with, allow some control on how we get the fish in the water, and maybe distribute them even better than we did last year using only our staff.
All right, this is a good time. We did have a question that came up during our Let's Talk Muskie session. We had a lot of questions during that session this morning at 10 a.m. But this was actually a question that is a perfect follow-up to what we were just talking about with trout stocking. Someone wanted to know, what do you think will be the situation with musky stocking this year? I know that still it happens at a different time of year, Andy, but as a commission at this point, if we had to tell people what was going on, are they going to be able to help out with musky stockings? What do you think we should tell that person right now?
So musky stocking is a lot different than trout stocking. Our trout, we stock 3.2 million trout over the course of a year. Our muskies, we stock about 30,000 purebred muskies and another 6,000 tiger muskies. So the scale of the operation is much different. We used to stock all of our muskies in the fall when they were probably between 6 and 10 inches long. We've made a change in recent years so that we stock older muskies that are over a year old, and they're now 14 to 16 inches, and primarily in the spring. And the reason for that is their survival is so much better when they're that much larger. There's less things in a lake that can eat them as a food item. And typically what we've done with muskies is they're often stocked from a truck with a hose, but we do work with some clubs, and we will offload some muskies to buckets or tanks. And some clubs might have a pontoon boat or another vessel available, and they'll distribute those muskies around the lake. Without knowing the details of each individual stocking, I would say that we'll do our best to work with our muskie clubs and our anglers to try to distribute those muskies, knowing that we can do more this year than we could do last year with our better practices and our better understanding of how to deal with COVID.
Okay. Another trout season related question while we're at it. Greg on Facebook wants to know why some of the lakes may not get stocked with trout until after the Mentored Youth Day each season.
So thanks for that question, Greg. So our staff are going to strive to get as many, if not all of those waters stocked before Mentored Youth Day, because it will only be 1 week before the opening day. But as we know, we've had a round of snow events in Pennsylvania the last number of weeks. And when we send trucks out from the hatchery, sometimes they get out on the road and they can't get back to a certain area because it's iced, or there's a road closure, or there's a traffic restriction due to weather. By moving everything up 2 weeks this year, we're gambling that we can make all those stockings and that weather isn't going to thwart our activities. So we will do our best. We'll do the best that we can. You will see, if you follow us on the Fish and Boat app, you will see when the stockings occur. You can follow that in real time. When a stocking occurs, we can update that database within 15 minutes of a change. So your best resource to keep track of our stockings is to pay attention to the Fish and Boat app that's available anywhere you can get apps in both Android and in help me out, Mike. What's the other?
The Apple.
Yeah, Apple, of course. What I have, an Apple iPhone. Yeah, Apple and Android, and that really is your best resource to keep track on what's happening on a day-to-day basis with the stockings.
I can relate to that one too, because I have little kids and we've been mentor fishing for years, and maybe once or twice every 3 years, just to put it in general like that, sometimes our local lake is stocked before Mentored Youth Day, and sometimes it's stocked between Mentored Youth and opening day. I just keep an eye on the schedule and we go somewhere else if it's not convenient.
I would say, I just add this, Mike, if someone doesn't have access to the app, they could always place a call to either our headquarters or to one of our regional law enforcement offices to double check and say, hey, I'm going out on Saturday. I just want to make sure that my favorite lake has been stocked. That's certainly a way you can avoid disappointment.
All right, so let's talk about the topics that we had this week. We had besides this session, which is our 10th of the week, we had 9 other ones. I'll just list those for you, Andy, and we'll go down this. Oh, wait a minute, 1 second, because there's one more thing here that related to the to trout fishing season, and that we wanted to squeeze in here. This is something that you brought up, and I think we should make people aware of it. If they're out there purchasing their fishing license this year at a retailer, if they want to print it out online, the summary book looks a little bit different this year. Do you want to point out the difference to them before we get off the trout season?
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to hold this up to the camera. And so that's what your summary book looks like for this year, 2021. And anybody who's been getting a license in Pennsylvania for a long time knows that they used to be a very small little book, and then they got bigger, and then they became color. And what's different though this year is the title, and some people may not realize it by the title, at least at first, is it's not only the fishing summary, it is also the boating handbook. And so for years, we've had only a fishing summary book, which tells you, what you could and can't do, and where to go fishing, and what's stocked, what's not stocked on the fishing side. And then if you purchase a boat, you typically would get the boating handbook. And we decided that there's a real need for anglers who boat to understand boating safety, the rules of the road, and things that you should be doing to be safe on the water when you're boating. And also we know that there's boaters who might be interested in fishing, but may not be that familiar with it. So we decided to make a combination publication this time. And if we open up to page, looks like it might be page We have sticky paper. Looks like page 36. If you open to page 36, you'll find out that within this larger book is a booklet all about boating. And so now for the first time in one place, if you can pick this up, as Mike said, at your issuing agent, at Walmart, at your local bait and tackle store, at one of our regional offices, at our headquarters, this free publication can be picked up, and for once and for all, you would have both boating handbook information, safety information, rules of the road, and your fishing license information all in the same place. And we hope that anglers will take that opportunity to educate themselves on the other parts of their outdoor activities. And of course, we have to say it, we always say it, you need to wear your life jacket. And one of the best things you can do to save your life or somebody else's is to wear a life jacket and cause somebody you know to wear their life jacket. And I'll just finish this off by saying that, you know, trout season usually opens in mid-April for a lot of the state. It's going to open earlier. We have something called the cold weather wear, and that's the rule that requires you in a small boat or a canoe or kayak to wear a life jacket between November 1st and April 30th. And the reason for that is if you happen to fall in the water when it's cold, especially if you're out early trout fishing, your opportunities to survive are greatly enhanced if you're wearing a life jacket. And they are greatly decreased if you are not and you happen to fall into the water. So again, we're going to start 2 weeks earlier. There's a greater opportunity for people to be on water that's colder than normal. And so we implore folks to leave home. You can leave a lot of things at home, but don't leave home without your life jacket. Make sure you put it on.
All right. Andy, hold up that publication for a few more seconds so people can get a look at that. You want to make sure that that's the book that you get if you're purchasing your license out at one of our issuing agents, at one of our offices, at a county treasurer's office. However, we want to make sure that people know that that's also available free online at fishandboat.com. You can look up the fishing summary booklet, and you can also download that to your phone as a PDF file to have the regulations with you. And of course, check out the Fishboat PA mobile app. All right, so now it's time. Let's just run down the list of the topics that we had this week as part of our virtual outdoor expo. We started things off on Monday morning with a virtual tour of the Benner Springs State Fish Hatchery up in Center County. We followed that up with a discussion with Brian Wisner, our director of the Bureau of Hatcheries, all about Pennsylvania State Fish Hatcheries. We had a conversation with a waterways conservation officer to answer many law enforcement related questions. We had a session about Pennsylvania's Steelhead program. We talked Kayaking 101, what's behind Pennsylvania's fastest growing boating trend. We had a session where we had a Q&A with the executive director, Tim Schaefer. We had a session about employment, how to get a job with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, 5 frequently asked questions. We had Kayak Fishing Pennsylvania's Rivers, featuring one of our regional education specialists who happens to be a really great tournament kayak angler, as well as we welcomed Russell Johnson, who's a renowned kayak angler who fishes a lot of tournaments. And just this morning we had Let's Talk Muskies with our hatcheries and fisheries staff, and that was a really popular one. Muskies, definitely a hot topic. So Andy, you watched most of these sessions throughout the week. What would you say was one of your favorite discussions? And a reminder to people that as Andy's answering, these are all available on our Facebook feed. If you found us right now, just scroll back down. You'll find our live sessions from this week, and we've also archived them over on the Fish and Boat Commission YouTube channel.
Well, geez, Mike, if I answer any one of those as my favorite, I won't be able to walk the hallways in the building any longer because someone will be offended. And I did watch most of them, and I thought they were all excellent. And they are all excellent because I think they covered a very wide breadth of information from corner to corner of the state, and not only the fishing side, but the boating side. I have a few favorite fish, and steelhead is one of them. So, of course, I'm always interested in anything about steelhead. I've been going to Lake Erie since the early 1980s, and I was introduced to that by a Fish and Boat Commission staff member who taught me the ropes way back when, and I will always have a fond place for steelhead fishing in Lake Erie tributaries. It's incredible. But maybe the thing that's most striking of everything that was covered in terms of increased use, increased attention is the absolute boom in non-powered boat usage, particularly kayaks. we've often stated and I think anyone watching would agree, any summer day, any spring day, you're just driving around Pennsylvania, just start counting the number of kayaks you see on the roof of vehicles going down the road. It's remarkable how many you see. And 10 years ago, it was rare if you ever saw a kayak on the roof of a vehicle. And it's a sign that kayaking is inexpensive, it's accessible. There are some safety things you need to know, but it's a way for a lot of people to get into fishing and boating that maybe never even thought about it before. And we're just amazed at how this is growing, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country. And so, as long as you follow the guidelines and the things, the tips that you were shown for safety, it could be a great way to get out on the water with your family. It's very economical compared to many other things that you could do for your family's recreation. It's healthy, you get some good sunlight, and maybe more importantly than anything else is at the end of the day, people don't want to kayak or fish on polluted, dirty water. People want to go outside and breathe fresh air, see clean water, see nice surroundings, see some wildlife, and know even if they're not fishing, that the water that they're paddling on is clean enough that the fish are healthy. And so we not only, serve the folks that want a kayak unto itself, but we're here as a resource agency to serve everything that lies underneath the kayak, to make sure the water is clean, the fish are healthy, the environment is good. And we hope in turn that people that then become our participants become the advocates for clean water and the environment and looking after fish and wildlife.
All right, so as we're looking at some kayaking video, including, I love this shot of the guy with the dog on the kayak. He's got his life jacket on, and actually I think that was taken right outside of Heinz Field in Pittsburgh. So right there around Point State Park. I think what we're looking at here is Little Buffalo State Park, or no, this is Gifford Pinchot State Park in York County. There with Fish and Boat Commission and DCNR staff teaming up for some kayaking. All right, so let's get to some of the unanswered.
Mike,
oh yeah,
Mike, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I want to give a tip while we're looking at that footage. Everyone take note at the shape of those paddles. And here's a clue for folks who are kayaking for the first time. If your paddle blades have writing on them, you need to be able to read the writing. And if you're reading the writing, then your paddle is oriented correctly. That's a cheap and easy tip for folks. And often when I'm fishing on the river, folks will go by paddling and we'll ask them if we can offer them some advice. And they always say yes. And we say, well, your day's going to go a lot better if you'll turn that paddle upside down and be able to read the writing. So there it is right there. You can see the writing on that paddle.
Good tip. Good tip. Okay, so a couple of follow-up questions from that session that we had, Kayaking 101. Here's a question we weren't able to answer to get to at the time, Andy. As far as this is a two-pointed question. So the unanswered question is, will other states accept Pennsylvania's launch permits? And as you answer that question, explain who needs a launch permit to begin with in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so in Pennsylvania, if you are launching from either a Fish and Boat Commission owned or controlled access area, be it a lake or a river or stream, and or a Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, state parks or state forests access area, you must have a launch permit that can be issued either by Fish and Boat Commission or DCNR. And that launch permit is for non-powered craft. If you have any sort of propulsion device on your boat, whether it be an electric motor or a gas motor, you need to have a boat registration. And so the rule of thumb across the country is, starting with registrations, if you're registered in one state, most states allow you to launch at their facilities and operate as long as you have a registration, because it's considered like similar to a driver's license that would be good in Pennsylvania or California, because there's standards that are followed by through the Coast Guard. However, launch permits are different. Most states, and this is a depends, one of those, well, the answer depends. Most states do not require you to register a non-powered craft. There are a few exceptions. I believe Ohio is one of those, and there might be some other exceptions. However, you may have to pay to use a launch just to put your craft in the water. The easiest thing to do is you can go on, usually a website like the American Canoe Association is a good source, or you can use Google and you can search for launch permits, launch permit requirements, and you'll find a list. Will give you an idea of what the state you might be traveling to requires. But in general speaking, if it's non-powered, most states are fairly liberal with not requiring you to have a launch permit or a registration.
Another question about kayaks. Somebody wanted to know, how does an anchor work on a kayak? Should I have an anchor for my kayak?
So that's another, it depends. So in Stillwater, if you don't have a lot of boat traffic and you don't have a lot of waves or wind, you can probably safely anchor a kayak from one end or the other. What you don't want to ever do is anchor a kayak or make a kayak rigid or immobile from a midship position. So let's say that you've got a rope with a milk jug full of concrete on it. You would not want to throw that over the side of your kayak, because the way you can easily tip out of a kayak is if there's leverage on one side or the other. And so they make something for kayaks called an anchor trolley. And folks that are into kayak fishing and are fairly serious about how they would position their kayak would purchase an anchor trolley. And it's merely like paracord or small rope, small line through pulleys in such a way that you can attach your anchor next to where you're sitting, and then you pull on the pulleys like you would on a clothesline, and you get that anchor to the back of the kayak, so that if the kayak is being pulled, it's being pulled on the front or the back at the point rather than pulled on the side. It is usually unwise to anchor a kayak in current. So most people, if they need to stop the fish while they're in flowing water, they might put the bow of the kayak up against a rock or in slow water or in an eddy, or paddle into an eddy, or maybe get on shore and get out and do some fishing. But you generally have to be very careful in a boat like a kayak to put a leverage point on it. And if you do it at all, you do it in calm water and only at the bow or the stern.
Good advice. So it's possible, but be really careful.
Correct.
Okay. Here's another question. This person had a question regarding our Keystone Select waters or our artificial lure delayed harvest section. So an area of stream where you're not allowed to use live bait, for instance. This person says that they like to float down a creek using live bait, but then there's a certain section of that creek that is a artificial lure only regulated section, such as a Keystone Select. And they want to know if they're able to continue to fish as long as they're not using live bait once they hit that section. So in other words, I've got some worms on board my kayak. I'm fishing one section of the creek. I get to the Keystone Select or artificial lure section. I don't use the worms anymore, but I still have them with me. Is that legal as I navigate that water?
And so I can answer that by giving an example, and a really good example is Pine Creek up in Lycoming County, Tioga, Lycoming County. It's a very large stream. We stock it for over 50 miles in length, and there is 2 special regulation areas on it. And it is likely that people during trout season or even during bass season could float through one of those special regulation areas. The one area allows catch and release, and it's all tackle. The other one is delayed harvest, artificial lures only. The rule of thumb is that if you're within one of those specially regulated areas, and it is artificial lures only, you cannot have bait on your person. Say you're standing on a river bottom or on the bank and you're wading or you're walking. You shouldn't have it on your person. You're there, you need to use artificial lures only. However, if you're floating through and say you were fishing for trout upstream using worms, and you're on your way through so you can fish below that specially regulated area and you want to use worms again, you can do that, but you can't stop. You need to float through, keep the lines in the boat, keep the rods, in the gunnels, and float through until you get past that section. If you decide you want to be able to fish open water and specially regulated water where there's a restriction on bait, you need to make that decision at the beginning of the day and you pack your boat accordingly and you don't have live bait on your person, then if you want to stop into Keystone Select, you can do so legally. If you just want to float through, take your lines out of the water, don't stop, don't fish, and when you get past the special regulated area, you can start fishing again. That's the cleanest way that we can do it, so it's fair to everyone.
And then this seems to be the last one that's associated with that topic of kayaking, and is a perfect transition from the last question. This person says, with so many more kayakers out there, and this would pertain to other boats and things too at lakes, but for instance, that last scenario, Ben just wants to know, when boaters and bank fishermen sort of collide, when they're both there, is there a regulation that requires boaters to maintain a certain distance from people fishing from the bank? Or Andy, is that more of a courtesy thing or something that's more self-policed?
I would say it's more of a courtesy and self-policing, and there are some regulations in place, like particularly our Walnut Creek Marina access, which is access to Lake Erie, and it's very popular at the mouth of the stream to fish for steelhead. There's some signage there, and the anglers are fairly well aware to know that when a boat under power is coming through that channel, the anglers need to retrieve their lines so they're not causing a hazard to the boater, because the boater has less options on navigation than the angler does. And I would say the same thing would be true, but as we have a lot new users coming into use our waterways, I think we would do well to think and talk about ethics and behavior on the water. So, the golden rule is, how would you like to be treated? So if you're paddling, and some folks just don't know, they're not anglers, they just got a kayak for the first time, they may not know. So you're fishing from the bank and you have your lines out at maybe at a distance on under bobbers, maybe 30 feet, 40 feet from shore. And along come some folks not paying attention, and they kayak right through your lines. Maybe the right way to do it is to take some time, not scream at them, but say, hey, we're fishing here, and it would be helpful if you would go out around us, see our floats, there's our markers. Not everyone's going to know what the etiquette is. So on the other side, if you're in the boat, if you're in the kayak, and people start yelling at you need to kind of stop and ask yourself, why would they be yelling at me? And what can I do to diffuse the situation? I think lakes, it's not as much of a problem as maybe in flowing water, particularly in streams. And, as we're talked all about opening day of trout season, it would not be wise for someone to take a kayak trip down a very popular stream that is crowded on opening day, because you're going to create conflict. So you could select when you go kayaking on a stream that's fished heavily. It could be early in the day. It could be the middle of the day if everyone targets mornings and evenings, or it could be to wait until the bulk of trout fishing is over for the first 4 or 6 weeks of the springtime trout fishing, and restrict your kayaking on a small stream like that until it's warm, maybe after Memorial Day, and then spend the summer kayaking when maybe active trout fishing is not such a big deal. So I guess the short answer to all that, Mike, is that patience from all parties, and think about the position the other person might be in, and give them the benefit of the doubt that they may not fully understand that they're negatively impacting your day in the field.
All right, moving on. A couple of other questions. This one I can answer if straight from a previous Facebook post, because this did come up in our executive director Q&A session, Andy. But we have another question. Someone didn't see that, so I'm just going to reiterate this one since it's so timely. So let's see here. Peter asks, can we please clarify ice fishing rules concerning jawjackers?
Sure. So for those who don't know, jawjacker is a brand name for an item that allows an ice fishing rod to be put under tension. And, picture a rod that is bowed as the way it would be bowed if a fish was hooked and you're fighting the fish. And you set this device on the ice, on the surface of the ice. Your line goes down the hole, and the rod tip is bent, and there's a release mechanism. So, not unlike what a mousetrap might do. Something is triggered, and then the rod is whips back into its straight position. In so doing, has tension on the fish, and theoretically the fish is hooked. And so for ice fishing, which is where these are used, people are used to from, centuries ago, people made what they call ice traps, which are basically tip-ups. And it's just a line with a hook and a bait on it down in the water and a spool, and the line is wrapped on a spool, and there's a metal arm and a flag. And when that spool turns, the flag goes up and somebody yells flag, and you leave wherever you are in the ice and you get over there and you pull on the cord and the string and see if there's a fish on the other end. Well, this allows you to do all of this, but instead of having this spool and this string or this line, you can use a regular fishing rod. And so after the fish is hooked, generally it's a spinning rod and reel, you can reel the fish up and fight the fish. And that we have a regulation in place that limits mechanical devices in fishing. And so we've been asked this question multiple times this winter. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a good ice winter. There's a lot more people fishing this year than we've seen in a couple of years. Jaw jackers have become more well-known, they're more popular. And so we're getting these questions. We're not going to have a resolution in place for the 2021 ice fishing season that we're in right now, but we're working on some draft language to bring to our commissioners in April, which is our next quarterly meeting. And if we're able to do that and agree upon some language that makes sense, we'd be looking to have something in place, hopefully for the next ice fishing season. Just understand that sometimes technology advances more quickly than our ability to make regulations to address it. And I think that's one of these cases.
So the jaw jacker, the automatic fisherman, another couple of other brand names, Guillotine, Quickset, Siku, that's SIKU. Those are just a couple of brand names of these type of devices. And under current regulations, just to clarify, they are not lawful. But we're considering looking at that, and people should keep an eye on that for our April commission meeting.
Yes, and you make a great point, Mike, by just naming the different companies and brands. There are brands, and there's probably wrinkles and other add-ons to some of these devices we haven't thought about yet. So in order to make a regulation that is effective and makes sense, we'll need some time to go through the whole list of everything that's available now, and then consider what might be on the horizon to try to make a regulation that addresses this appropriately. So we ask for some patience. Sometimes, and maybe the safest thing to say is, you can consult the summary book. Sometimes there's a lot of things available for fishing or hunting that might be legal in some other states that aren't necessarily legal in Pennsylvania or where you happen to be going fishing or hunting. So, it's kind of always good to check the regulations before you make a significant purchase like that, especially if something that's cutting edge technology or much different than traditional.
Andy, we talked about voluntary permits a little bit during our Musky session this morning and the success of that program. For those who don't know, we have voluntary permits that benefit specific fishing programs. We have a voluntary bass permit, we have a wild trout voluntary permit, a habitat and waterways conservation permit, and we have a musky permit. If you purchase one of those, the money goes into a fund that benefits those programs specifically. So, a couple of questions here. Eric does have a question from Facebook, wants to know, given the success of these other programs, do we have any other ideas? Are there any other, what's the status of that program? Have we thought about expanding it to any other areas?
So we haven't had any conversations about other species at this point. What we can say is that 2020 was the first year we did it. And if memory serves correctly, I think we had something around $130,000 no, that's not right. That was 2019 was the first year we did it. We had about $130,000. Last year, 2020, we ended the year with about $280,000 or $89,000. So more than doubled the amount of contributions, which means we ought to be able to more than double the number of projects that we're putting these funds towards. And the way it works is we've directed our staff to only use the funds for the species that they were designated to. and to come up with some use some initiative, use some creativity to try to do some things that we don't normally do with our normal funding sources, and to try to spread those types of projects around Pennsylvania geographically. And so since this question came up with muskies, the example that we used for muskies where we spent money in 2020 was we purchased minnows, which is something that some clubs have done for the agency in the past, where they've provided donation and we buy forage minnows so we could feed muskellunge live food to get them bigger and to get them conditioned to eat live food before they're released. Our muskies are typically grown on a dry diet, and a dry diet means a pellet dropping into the water from above them. And so you can help the muskies' behavioral abilities by feeding them live food before you send them out into the tough world where there's prey and predator. And so that's a benefit of using minnows. We use some of the funds for muskies to do that. In order to grow muskies and to grow them year round, basically, so we can stock larger ones in the spring, we need to heat the water, because when the water gets cold, fish's metabolism slows down, and trying to keep muskies growing during the winter when it's ice cold isn't very successful. So it costs money to buy heaters, costs money to run heaters, and heating water is an expensive proposition. And so we use some of the funds on that. We're thinking about, it's a kind of a sneak peek, we're thinking about for 2021, we have some ideas for muskies, including purchasing additional pit tags and pit tag readers, so that our staff across the state, when they encounter a muskie, will put this transponder tag into the muskie's body cavity. And then if it's captured anytime again, you wave a wand over it, and just like Easy Pass on the turnpike, you'd be able to identify that specific muskie. And that gives us information about movement, about growth, about survival, and things like that that are really important to help us manage muskies. And also perhaps if we know when that muskie was stocked or where it was stocked from, additional information on how stocking bigger fish in the spring compares to stocking smaller fish in the fall, which is what we traditionally did. And so we have other examples for the voluntary permits we won't go into, but the idea is that we're trying to go above and beyond what we normally do in using these funds, and then report back to the public the very interesting and neat things that we're doing with that additional funding.
And the people who have supported that program, no doubt, are usually pretty well invested into those programs. The avid bass anglers, the musky anglers, people who are passionate about wild trout have really supported those programs. So we want to take this opportunity to thank them and let them know that those permits are still available. They are a permit. It is not required, but it is essentially a donation to those programs. And we appreciate what you've helped us do over the past 2 years.
In terms of individual contributions, the folks that support the bass voluntary permit outnumber the individual people who've contributed in each of the other categories. People Andy, sometimes want to know that.
Thank you. 2 questions related to trout fishing again, if you don't mind here. We actually have 2 of them on Facebook at this moment about gill lice. Gill lice, if you would describe what they are, and someone just looking for an update as to how it's impacted hatcheries, whether our hatcheries, commercial hatcheries, and wild brook trout populations.
Sure. We'll make this brief because gill lice is a long story, but I can bring everybody up to speed pretty quickly on what they are and how they are an impact. And so, gill lice are a parasite, maybe 2 millimeters long, so very small, that occur on the gills primarily of trout. And in Pennsylvania, we have 2 species of gill lice that we're aware of. One predominantly impacts and infects rainbow trout, and the other one impacts brook trout. Rainbow trout are non-native. The gill lice that impact them came from the West Coast, the same as the rainbow trout did. And primarily they're a concern in Lake Erie and the tributaries in our steelhead. The native brook trout are our only native char species that's in a stream. We also have lake trout, are a native species of trout as well. Our brook trout are impacted by another species of gill lice. and how these impact fish. So consider um, if you have trouble breathing and something is impacting the quality of your lungs, it's going to make it harder to breathe. And if you don't have any trouble breathing, but suddenly you have a lot of trouble respirating and you're in a stream and a predator is chasing you, you might have a hard time evading the predator. And what we find out is these gill lice got into our wild trout streams through generally through means that are linked to a hatchery in some way. And they can infest native brook trout in large numbers. And you can have as much as 20–25% of the population has gill lice. So they do two things. One, it can make an individual trout, make it very hard for them to breathe or respire, to take in oxygen, because they're attached to their gills. And number two, as I mentioned, it can make it harder for them to escape predation. The overall impact is you can have a reduced population of native wild brook trout in a stream and maybe not understand why until you start looking a little more deeply. So what is Fish and Boat Commission doing about it? This first became a problem in 2016 when we discovered it in some wild trout streams in one part of the state. We've since alerted our biologists, we've trained them, we've trained our cooperators on the unassessed waters program to look for and inspect for brook trout when they do wild trout surveys. And we put some things in place to reduce how gill lice can get into our cooperative nurseries and ensure that they're not coming from our hatchery trout raised and stocked by the Fish and Boat Commission. Doing those things, we have only found one incidence of gill lice in the wild in the year 2020. And I think we have somewhere in 24 or close to 30 streams in Pennsylvania where we had found gill lice in our native brook trout. So we've tried to slow the spread of gill lice by slowing them at sources. In addition to that, we're trying to better understand where gill lice came from. And there are several schools of thoughts on gill lice. Some are that they evolved within the range of native brook trout and they've been here all along. And others are that they might have evolved in part of the range of native brook trout, but maybe not in Pennsylvania's part of that range, maybe only in the northern part and say up in Canada. And so we've got some studies underway with a grant we have from Sea Grant to try to better understand the genetics of our gill lice. And what's very common right now, and if I could take one more minute, Mike, what's very common, we all, I think, understand better about viruses and DNA from watching the news reports regarding COVID in the last year. And you can do the same thing with a parasite or an organism. You can evaluate its DNA and how related to something else an organism is. And so some of the work we're doing with gill lice is to determine, maybe we can figure out, are these gill lice native to the landscape or do they come from somewhere else? And how you would do that is you would collect gill lice from a lot of different locations and then compare their DNA and determine if they are alike or different. The same way that the strains are being compared using DNA, the strains of COVID, and we're understanding there's more than one strain. And so how a species develops and where it develops and how long it is present and how long a parasite and a host interact can determine how lethal or non-lethal it can be for a fish. So that's kind of a little bit of the inside baseball there on the gill lice. We're pleased that we've greatly reduced the spread and that we think we have that part under control, and we're seeking some more scientific answers to better understand what gill lice actually mean in a wild population and where they may have originated from in Pennsylvania.
Last year, prior to the pandemic, we had a Trout in the Classroom Summit related to that program, where we gathered a bunch of about 100 people probably in the room to talk about our Trout in the Classroom program, which is something that many people who have kids in high school age are familiar with. There was a presentation by one of our leading guys, Koja Yamashita, who talked about gill lice, and that presentation is on our YouTube channel. So go to YouTube, look up Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, search for the gill lice presentation if you have any more, if you're looking for more information on that topic from another one of our agency experts. All right, Andy, so there are a couple more lingering questions here, but I thought what we do before we get into those is talk about some of the suggestions that people had for us after presenting all of the sessions that we came up with for the week and our the first time we've done a virtual outdoor expo. Some people suggested, this was a pretty popular suggestion, that we do something about our walleye program. Walleye is a popular fishery. It's been thriving in Lake Erie for the past several years and doesn't look to be stopping. And walleye are all over the state. Talk generally about how exciting the walleye fishery is in Pennsylvania right now.
So I'm going to work backwards on that question, Mike, and I'm going to jump ahead to something we were going to talk about eventually, I believe, which is the Fisheries Summit, the virtual Fisheries Summit that we're going to be hosting on February 20th from about 9 in the morning until mid-afternoon. There'll be some additional information I think Mike and I will cover on that before we're done here. But the reason I want to bring that up on the walleye is we're going to address all the major sport fish species or species groups throughout the day. And there's a segment specific to walleyes. And so better than I can explain here, there will be graphics and visuals that will show you the lakes and rivers where we stock walleyes, the numbers of walleyes that we stock, and how we manage walleyes, and even some tips and tricks on where to look for them, the habitat they prefer, and maybe a tip or two about how to fish for them more effectively. Lake Erie is considered to be shared by other states as well in Canada. It's considered to be the premier walleye fishery in the world. I mean, there's more large walleyes and greater numbers of walleyes in Lake Erie than anywhere else in the world. And that's because Lake Erie provides the absolutely perfect spawning, growth, and foraging habitat for species like walleyes. And so Lake Erie, when things are good, and they are outstanding right now, the year in 2019, 2020, 2021 are record size age groups and year classes of walleyes that are in the legal harvest length now. And so the opportunities to fish for walleyes in Erie right now are outstanding, probably never better in any living person's memory. However, Lake Erie is a unique fishery. So what about the people that live along the Susquehanna or the Juniata or the Allegheny or the Delaware, or any number of lakes where we stock walleye? So the short answer to that is that walleyes are naturally occurring in Lake Erie, the northwest part of the state, and even in some inland rivers. But in most places where we have walleye, like a lot of our lakes, we stock them. And so the commission raises walleyes to fry or fingerling. So, either an inch long or a couple inches long, and we stock them out by the millions every year, so we can create what we call put, grow, and take walleye fishery. And those are available in many lakes around the state. A lot of times it's a state park lake. And in our flowing rivers like the Susquehanna, the Allegheny, the Juniata, walleyes in some cases reproduce, and we may augment the stocking in addition to that. The great time to fish for walleyes is while we're talking right now. So walleye season is open until March 14th. And so the end of winter is a great time to look for walleyes because they migrate upriver looking for a place to spawn. And if there's an impoundment somewhere on that route, a good place to find walleyes, like say tomorrow, would be to go look below a dam on a river system that has walleyes in it. Or, where there's a heavy riffle and a big pool below it. Last thing I'll say about walleyes is, although you can catch them throughout the day, walleyes are a low light species, and the unique ability they have is why they get their name. Their eyes reflect light and they look like mirrors. They have that ability, which shows you that they are a low light predator. They have those eyes for a reason. And so if you didn't know anything else about walleye, you would know that you would do well to fish for them at low light, fish for them at night, fish for them in areas when they might be deep in a hole where they can use those low light seeing abilities to the best advantage. So I would wrap that answer up by saying, stay tuned. And if you're unable to join us next week for the live streaming, you will be able to find that posted online and on YouTube, and you can focus in on the walleye only portion if that's what you're most interested in.
Yeah, in this day and age, we are expanding the amount of virtual content that we're offering to people. These kind of sessions, educational opportunities in the absence of in-person programs. And so we're really excited to offer this virtual outdoor expo this week. And on Saturday, February 20th, you want to stay tuned to the Fish and Boat Commission Facebook page and our website and YouTube, as you mentioned, where we'll be really where this content will be living even after this. So the next one on the calendar here is the virtual Fisheries Summit, and that will happen on Saturday, February 20th. So if you found us for this session, you won't have any problem finding the virtual Fisheries Summit content either. So that's exciting. Andy, the other suggestion that people had throughout the week was they just wanted to talk about fishing, like fishing tactics. You know, they wanted to go a little bit beyond the management of the fish species, how we're raising them at the hatcheries, and they were hoping that some time in the future we could provide some other experts to talk about where to go and how to catch different species of fish. Certainly, we have a lot of trout fishermen, and that side of the sport is easily handed down because we have so many participants. But from steelhead, that was one that people really were interested in. Where do I go? I'd love to go, but I don't know even how to get started. You talked about walleyes. We had questions about catching flathead catfish. And of course, muskies. People really want to learn more about musky fishing in Pennsylvania. Just the chance to catch something really big really excites people. And the other suggestion that people had was just giving them the chance to talk about rules and regulations. They really like the opportunity to ask, I'm a little unclear on this, whether it's the jaw jacker or, our catch and release regulated waters, just maybe something as simple as a license display requirement. Anytime, sure, those things exist in the book and sure, those things exist online. But the reason we're doing this is because typically this time of year, we'd be at a booth somewhere, maybe at the farm show or the Great American Outdoor Show or the Philadelphia Boat Show. And if someone sees a Fish and Boat Commission logo like you and I are wearing, it's a great opportunity to talk. So those are just some suggestions. Anything that struck you as somewhere else that we could, fill a void for people that would be interested in presenting?
So sure. So I pretty good, couple of good thoughts about that. So first of all, what we're doing now, as you said, is normally I've spent many years in February standing in the booth at the Great American Outdoor Show in Harrisburg, and you stand there and you get hit with questions all day long. And we'd have our officers there. We've had other experts, and we would direct a person to whoever was there we think could best answer the question. And if we couldn't answer the question, we take the notes, we get their contact information and try to get back to them. So although it's you and I right now speaking to people out there that are watching, this is a back and forth. So how we learn what's important to people is when they tell us. So all those things that you just mentioned are things that we may have somewhere on our website, maybe here and there. There's probably some frequently asked questions on a certain topic. We did something on trout fishing years ago at a seminar that we did at a commission meeting. We did something on ice fishing, but some of those things get stale over time, or maybe they're not in the right format for today's technology. I happen to know, because I see these things, I happen to know that we're on a number of virtual instruction programs for 2021 with our outreach, education, and marketing staff, as we really went into big time in 2020. Our outreach and marketing education and marketing staff basically work every weekend, and they have days off during the week because they go out and they do fishing skills instruction, steelhead programs. They do the things that are being mentioned. Well, because of COVID, they weren't able to do those things. So we turned them on to trying to produce videos. And I think what Fish and Boat has now is the beginnings of what we might call, like, say, a Fishing and Boating Academy or Fishing and Boating Pedia, or, whatever you want to title it. We're building a very large catalog of topic-oriented programs that should address questions like this. So the questions you got is a checklist of the types of things that we have produced, that we could produce new and better versions, and so they match up with other programs, and they all look the same. And so I think it's a really good point, and we have to be cognizant that not everybody has been fishing since they were 3 years old. And so we really want to attract people to fishing and boating as adults and put the tools together for them to make it easy. because people will do things that are easy and convenient. And so we take that to heart. I think we have some things underway that behind the scenes I'm aware of that the person asking the question or the people asking the question should be pleasantly surprised by if they stay tuned to our social media channels.
All right, and just to follow up on what you said there, to lead people to a resource that's available right now, if you're looking for more content like this, whether it's for someone who's new to fishing, if you're looking for some fishing and boating related activities for kids in your family, we have an activities and education portal that's available right now on our website, fishandboat.com, and you just want to search the activities and education portal. It's in the Learning Center section of our website, so easy to find. And there's all sorts of resources there, from things about fish, fly fishing, paddle sports, watercraft safety that you might want to freshen up on before you head out this spring. Another area that people don't always know that the Fish and Boat Commission is responsible for managing is amphibians and reptiles. If you ever met a kid that doesn't love a turtle or wants to know more about snakes, it would be surprising. So there are all sorts of cool resources available through the activities and education portal at fishandboat.com. Andy, I want to thank you so much. It's been an hour here and it's flown by, and we've thrown question after question to you, and you've answered every single one of them. And I hope everyone who's been watching has learned a lot. If you asked a question and we didn't get to it today, it's probably because we did address it in one of our other sessions, or we had already addressed it. So we didn't want to have too much redundant content. We wanted to have questions that hadn't been asked. Our virtual outdoor expo sessions are all available and archived on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page, our YouTube channel. So please take a look at those, give them a like, give them a share, and let other people know about the content that we created this week. So Andy, as we wrap things up here for the 2021 Virtual Outdoor Expo, the floor is yours for some final thoughts.
So first of all, in spending all those years and all those outdoor shows, I got lots and lots of snake questions. So I'm really disappointed no one asked me a snake question. I spent a decade of my career working on reptiles, amphibians, and endangered species, and love to answer snake questions. So I know people are very interested in them. That's the only thing I think is different, really, based on the breadth of the questions you asked, is there was no snake questions today. I think the summit, the Fisheries Summit we're going to do a panel at the end. We'll have more than one person there to answer questions. So maybe if anyone didn't get a chance to ask or get their question answered today or this week about specific species-related fisheries questions, they'll have another opportunity to do that next week as well. So I think that's good. And, I think it's very exciting that people in 2020 went to the outdoors to recreate and to find a way to get some peace. So I think that was a great thing for 2020. And we just hope all the people that joined us in the outdoors in 2020 remember how much fun they had, bring another friend, and continue to do it in 2021 and beyond.
Okay, Andy Shields, our Deputy Executive Director for Field Operations, thanks so much for spending all this time with us this afternoon. And we want to thank you as an agency. The Fish and Boat Commission, it is our mission to, make sure that you're a part of everything that we do, that we're transparent, that we have a two-way conversation at all times when we make the decisions that affect the anglers and boaters of Pennsylvania. So these kind of opportunities are vital in achieving that mission. So we thank you for tuning in this week and being a participant and making this as interactive as possible. So I want to thank everyone for watching this week. This has been a great experience. Some technical issues along the way that were growing that we expected, but certainly helped us grow as we continue to provide this content in the future. So make sure you continue to follow the Facebook page and our website as well for future content. So for Andy, my name is Mike Parker, the Communications Director. I want to thank you for joining us all week long, and we'll see you out on the water in 2021.
Thanks.